Welcome to Cube Cruisin', a Magic the Gathering podcast where we design, discuss, play, and review a new cube each episode. I'm Hayden, joined by my handsome co-host, Eric.
That's me. I'm Eric.
It says here right in the copy.
Hey.
Today, we're discussing my Shard cube, where friendly trios of colors are prioritized and the archetypes are wide.
Yeah, 3 colors. Well, not all 3 colored like kind of sections, just the shards, which is very interesting because I'm not as familiar with the kind of differences between the shards and the wedges. So I'm excited to dive into this one.
The cube is 360 cards. It is designed for, hopefully, multiple people, but it'll primarily be me and Eric testing for the purposes of this podcast, this episode. My introduction to Magic the Gathering was with Jund, specifically a Kresh the Blood-Braided EDH deck.
I am very familiar with that.
Yeah. For those who don't know, Kresh is a vanilla creature, vanilla 3/3 for 5, and he gets bigger for every creature that dies. Very good in EDH when there are 3 times as many opponents. It is still my favorite shard. See episode 1 with the Jund Cube. Alara is also my favorite plane in general. I've mentioned before, the Alara sets are the only block that I collect. The flavor is so rich there. Each shard is distinct in its visual style and its mechanics, and yet they mesh so well together, except maybe artifacts. It's sort of off on its own little island in Esper. This cube was obviously inspired by Shards of Alara, but also that period of Magic. I dipped my toes into Magic around OG Theros block, so it's that nostalgia for a thing you never experienced, but I just look at these cards and I fall in love all over again. It also helps that the most prolific artists of that period, it's a veritable who's who. Raymond Swanlin, Wayne Reynolds, Chippy, Steve Belladin, David Palumbo, Mark Teaton, Jeremy Jarvis as the art director. Just bam, 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 bam.
Yeah, very distinct.
I wanted this here Shard Cube not just to focus on the color trios, but match the relative power level of that time and place. Some fantastic resources I used in researching this and getting a feel for that are the OG Receivables episode on Shards of Alara. Also, Reddit user, I'm gonna mess this up, ORAYMW? ORAYMW?
Closer than what I would have thought of.
Good. They have some fantastic limited draft primers on Shards of Alara
awesome.
and Conflux, talking about these were bomb commons. These archetypes showed up. These cards
That's so
powered up.
useful.
I know. It was hugely helpful in deciding, I'll put this in, or something like this common I would have looked over. It's like, no, Aven Squire is a flying exalted creature for 2 mana. That's really, really good, and you want that. It's like, fantastic, thank you. Any conclusions I may have even come to on my own, they were shortcuts, and that was hugely helpful as well. Check out these draft primers if you're interested. A question I would posit to you and to me. What are shards to us? For me, the shards go beyond the colors. They're a way of life, their strategies, their looks, their feels. They represent these broad styles and strategies of viewing and playing the game. They quickly became shorthand. You say Esper, people know roughly what you're trying to do with your deck or your strategy. Do shards have any meaning or resonance for you as a player?
Definitely as a player, I think the 3 color combinations, again, I think I don't really have much of a distinction between shards versus wedges. I don't think to me there isn't a kind of identifying thing, but the individual 3 color combinations is something that does resonate with me very well. I mean, we built the Jund Cube together. I've made a Mardu Cube that's having those 3 colors. 3 is also just a very satisfying number, and just having 3 color pairs within there, there's a lot of room to kind of play around with different sub archetypes that all kind of build towards a singular tricolored archetype that represents all three. And I think that Magic does that very nicely. And they represent that in a lot of the sets that they've done 3-color focuses. Alara itself is not one that I'm very familiar, and that's why I think I'm particularly very, very excited to try out this cube, because I feel like I can be part of that or enjoy aspects of that theme and plane.
I want to bring my enjoyment of Shards to other people, including you. You, first and foremost, I suppose. You're the person playing this with me.
I am. That's me.
What else I like about Shards? They are flavorfully evocative. Their looks so often resonate with their mechanics. There's again that good resonance there. And simplicity. As you said, people like things in threes. And just having these 3 colors, they do this set of things. And they often bleed into each other, but being distinct in that way, how they act these 3 colors together. I like it. It's a big part of Magic's success overall is the identities the colors form, and then these sub-identities that they form as groups. Certainly in Guilds of Ravnica has that in spades.
Yeah, I love color pairs and the guilds and like the schools from like Strixhaven, and I enjoy all of that. And then taking that a level above that with the 3 colors is also very enjoyable. I think 4 colors, I don't, because that's, I think, has too much things going into it, for me at least, to look at a 4-color identity as a kind of definable thing, whereas I find 3 does that very nicely.
Yeah, the jump from 4 to just being 5 colors is not too much of a leap, the amount of fixing you would need to get to 4 anyways, and it's more often defined by what is not there.
Yeah.
It's like jazz.
Yeah.
It's about the colors you don't play. For the actual construction of the cube, the shards, and the cards, after some initial experimenting, I chose to retain Shards of Alara's original mechanics.
Nice.
Why broke what ain't fixed? This means that the themes are as follows. Bant Exalted, more about a single creature attacking and supporting that. This is exemplified in Rafik of the Many, 1 green, white, blue for a 3/3 legendary creature human knight with Exalted, and whenever a creature you control attacks alone, it gains double strike until end of turn. It wants only one thing to be getting in and rewarding that. Esper artifacts, more colored artifacts, which we've gotten a lot more of in recent years. I'm happy about that. In Esper, it's Sharoom the Hegemon, 3 white, blue, black for a 5/5 legendary artifact creature Sphinx with flying. When Sharoom the Hegemon comes into play, you may return target artifact card from your graveyard to play. So touching a bit on Black's graveyard stuff, but colored artifacts, bringing those back, rewarding you for doing your big artifact plays. You just lost your Mirror Battlesphere. It's back in.
It's back. It's
you
back,
got
baby.
8 Mirror now. Hope you're happy. I am.
I would be quite happy in that situation.
Grixis is about things dying and then coming back, exiting the graveyard, hopefully taking some of your opponent's things with you. Grixis, it's Thraximundar, 4 generic, a blue, a black, and a red for a 6/6 legendary creature, zombie assassin. Forgot it was an assassin. With haste. And whenever it attacks, defending player sacks a creature, and whenever a player sacks a creature, you may put a 1/1 counter on Thraximundar. You want things to die. You want things to kill both your stuff and your opponent's stuff, because you benefit from that with the Unearth triggers, getting an extra opportunity to use your creatures, whereas your opponents do not, because they suck. Ha 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 ha.
Got him.
Got him. Jund is about big beefy boys coming out when you sack other things.
Yeah.
Big dragons. Devour is the mechanic. This is exemplified with Gluttonous Hellkite, a relatively new card. It costs XX, black, red, green for a 3/3 creature dragon with flying and trample, and when you cast this spell, each player sacks X creatures. Gluttonous Hellkite enters with 2 +1/+1 counters for each creature sacked this way. So it's Devour which is one-sided. It's only on you. It's asking you to sack your creatures, but it also makes them sack. I love this
Yeah.
card. I hope it shows up and does well.
Yeah, it feels like it also, even though it's a more modern card, definitely feels like it would be of that era in terms of what it's asking of you.
Absolutely. And Naya Big Power. I've made a little change there. It is now more focused on dinosaurs,
Ooh.
who tend to trigger
yeah.
high power amounts, like 4 or greater,
Absolutely.
5 or greater. Big dinosaurs, Gishath, Sun's
The
Avatar.
best dinosaur.
5 red, green, white for a 7/6 legendary creature dinosaur avatar.
Let's go.
Let's go. Trample, vigilance, haste, and when it deals combat damage to a player, reveal that many cards from the top of your library. Hopefully it's 7. Put any number of dinosaur creature cards onto the battlefield and the rest on the bottom of your library. Fill your board.
So good.
Why only have a little bit when you could have a lot? Why have a small plate when you could have the buffet? Get in. I spent 8 mana for this 7/6. I want more.
Yes.
I'm hungry, Nana. I came to eat. Dinosaurs are just fun. You look at them and you say, "Oh, is that a dinosaur?" And then you smile and clap.
And they look back at you and they're like, yes.
And then they look back and you say, "Rare."
Right. It's nice too because they've also, I think, pushed the power level of dinosaurs to feel more in line with other archetypes, even I think from that era. I'm very excited to see where you've balanced putting in these dinosaurs to, I guess, bring them in power line with the other archetypes of this era of Magic.
I would say that Naya as a whole has fewer cards than the other shards from Alara itself, because Alara cared about 5 power or more, which is a little too much to hit.
Yeah.
And dinosaurs only really started getting juice in original Ixalan. So they are newer cards. And that's one thing I'm a little concerned about, because Naya is full of newer cards that, as much as I can curate it, like, to match the previous power levels, you're still gonna get, like, if they were erring on, like, this is 2.5 mana's worth of abilities, modern design is to just make that 2 instead of making that 3. There are cards in here that I'm worried, like, ooh, will these be too high power for what I want to achieve here, even though they support the archetype? And Naya is part of that. But we'll see.
Yeah.
It may just be too fun. And I'm like, oh, I'm not going to change that. Yeah, it's a little broken if you go into dinosaurs, but you get your big trample dinosaur boys and they go rare.
Yeah, and like having power outliers is absolutely I think, a good thing to have. But are there any other archetypes or cards that you're concerned about in terms of like power level?
Yeah, Slimefoot and Squee is one I have my eyes on. It is a very new card. It costs a red, a green, and a black. It enters the battlefield and creates a sapling, and then once it's in your bin, you can pay 1 and Jund to reanimate it, as well as another creature from your graveyard. And I just worry that that might be too much happening on one card. It is asking a lot mana-wise, but it's only 3 mana. I don't know. I have my eyes on it.
Even if it is too good, I think having it be a restriction on having those 3 colors, I think that's a good place to have the power outliers. Especially in a cube like this, I think your 3-colored multicolor cards is a good place to kind of invest some of that power budget.
Add the juice.
Add the juice.
Yeah, that's fair. There are also 2 cards in here, Obika, Brute Chronologist, and Sundial of the Infinite. Their effects are both tap and the turn, effectively. They're there.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
They're
yeah,
there
yeah.
for unearth shenanigans, because you unearth a creature to the unearth trigger goes on the stack, and then you just end the turn and you get the creature.
Oh,
That might be
interesting.
too cute. It might be like, sure, that's a fun little thing to do in Commander where you can always get out your legendary creature that ends the turn, but is it worth having 2 slots in the cube, or do we just want to get that out of there, replace them with otherwise good Grixis cards? I don't know.
Yeah,
We'll see.
we'll have to see.
what are we hoping to learn in this? What am I hoping to learn in this? Have I correctly gauged the power level of these archetypes? Are they balanced enough? Is there going to be one that is clearly dominant? I got the feeling, reading the draft primers, that the most common and the most powerful thing you would gravitate towards in Alara Limited was Exalted. To quote Patrick Sullivan, it changes the tenor of combat. You're now getting in with one creature, and then you have a lot of blockers up. Which I like. I think that's interesting. That's why I kept it. But is that the obvious, like, oh yeah, go Exalted, they can't get in? Even with the power levels turned down, is it just going to be objectively correct to pick cards that were made in the last 5 years as opposed to Alara or 2009-ish era cards? Some of that you can account for. Like, okay, I understand that these are too much, but there's some uncommons. There are commons here that fit the roles that aren't too powerful.
Yeah.
But is it still going to be, I'm very familiar with these cards, so I'll take them more. Or I know what these effects are. I don't want to take a chance on Branching Bolt. I don't know what... and I can just take anything else. The purpose of having and retaining the Alara archetypes is for them to bleed into each other. There's some synergy, there's some meshing between each of these shards, so that if you're in Exalted, you're also going to be taking some colored artifacts from Esper. You're going to be taking some big boys from Naya, because you want big keyword attackers anyways in Exalted. And they all sort of do that. I like that. Have I done that enough, though? We'll see.
Yeah, only time will tell.
I'm also adhering a little more strictly to the Shards of Alara limited environment by including miniature cycles within each shard. So there are the Phyrexia All Will Be One skull bombs, color-carrying artifacts that only exist in Esper.
Yeah.
In Naya, there are cards like Soul's Might and that cycle that care about the power and reward you for high power. Things of that nature to reinforce the identity of the shards and like, oh, I took this, that means that maybe this will also be here, and just focus the player a little more. And we'll see if that's any good. Cube construction and number breakdown. I chose these cards myself. A good portion are from my collection of Alara cards, but there are many from newer sets, just have maybe a lower power level than what I would otherwise choose. 360 cards between a range of 2 and 8 players. Multiple ways to play. I just like playing Magic. It doesn't matter to me how we draft specifically. I like grid drafting and burn drafting at 2 players. Burn drafting is still good at 4. You can just get a traditional draft in at 8. Oh, so many fun ways. Good stuff. There's naturally a high density of multicolor cards, much higher than a standard, 360 cube one would first put together. And there's a lower density of colorless and monocolored cards, naturally. And even within those monocolored cards, a lot more will have off-color effects. So you'll have your white 1-drop, but it taps and asks blue of you to get an ability. For monocolor, there are about 40 cards each, which is 11% of the cube. Multicolor wholly takes up 21% of the cube with 75 cards. Shards themselves are, I think, 25. Colorless is 30 cards, or around 8%. Lands are 50 at 14, because I think we need a lot of fixing for what we're going for.
Yeah, that seems like a pretty good number.
And then I have a wee little, barely over 1%, wild cards. These are cards where I figured we're at 360, I can throw these in and they make me smile and I like them, and it's not going to affect the construction of the cube too much.
Yeah, I think that's a good mentality to get into, and not being so rigid with the numbers, because once you're playing with a handful of cards are there, the numbers don't really matter. Even if you go above 360 or below 360, just for I think anybody out there who's worried about trying to adhere to very distinct numbers or slots, that at the end of the day, play the cards that you want to play. and enjoy those. Yeah.
Exactly. There's also value in, especially in this environment, I feel, not wholly putting everything into it has to support the archetype. You can be a little disciplined, you can pull back a bit, and have cards that are generically good. They do the things the color wants to do, like discard effects in black. They're not specifically going to help the unearth game plan, but black does discard effects, so we have a couple in there. Doesn't have to be so rigid, so adherent to the doctrine of an archetype.
Yeah, I think still having those kind of generic glue cards that fit in the various different colors to kind of fill those foundational roles, I think it's important to have those in a cube. Not everything can be completely synergistic based.
Yeah. And what am I not gonna include Forgotten Ancient? How can I forget this ancient? One additional note I'd like to add on the construction of the cube itself. I decided not to support a 5-color deck.
Seems reasonable.
The payoffs were either traps in Fusion Elemental, which is a 8/8 vanilla creature that you can cast for one of every color. It's not very good.
Yeah.
Or they're very pushed, like modern cards. I believe there's a dragon, a 5-color dragon in one of the commander decks that has a keyword from every color, and then it does extra on top of that, and it only costs 6. And I just didn't want to do that. The reward for being in 5-color here is you're playing all of the best cards. And if you're eating your veggies, you're taking your lands well, which you're going to be competing for everyone else to do, then go for it. I want to see it. I just didn't want to include an explicit, go here, do this, play this card for the 5-color.
Yeah, like if you want to do the 5-color thing, you got to work for it.
Exactly. I've also added in 2 custom cards. I don't know how necessary they'll be, but I wanted them, so I put them in. One is part of the incarnation cycle, so Brawn and Anger are probably the most 2 well-known of them, but they put it in all 5. They're 4-mana 2/2 creatures with a keyword ability, and then when they're in the graveyard, they give all your creatures that keyword ability. So for Brawn in green, that's Trample. For Anger in red, that's Haste. Black's wasn't the best. I believe it was Swamp Walk. And I wasn't too high on it, so I just made it Death Touch instead.
Oh, sick.
And called it Rot.
Oh, hell yeah. That sounds awesome.
Rot, not the name of a Magic card already. Also, I've taken an Alchemy card and mixed it up a little bit. It is Emperor Apatzek Intli the 4th for red, green, white. I have it as a 3/3 legendary creature, human noble, and whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield, if its power is 4 or greater, it gets haste. If its toughness is 4 or greater, you get 4 life. If it costs 4 or greater, look at the top 4 cards of your library, put a creature from among them into your hand.
Interesting.
Just caring about 4 and big things, either in cost or size. And for 3 mana, I think that's a steal.
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe I should make it 4. We'll see how it plays.
We'll see. Yeah. What did you change about this one from the Alchemy version?
I toned down its toughness. It was originally a 3/4 for 3.
Oh.
And it had an alchemy-specific effect for mana value 4 or greater. I believe it seeks a card.
Yeah,
Yeah. So I just had to be like, look at the top 4. It cares about 4
that's
already.
Nice. Yeah, I think that's a nice concession, especially if you're looking to bring in closer to like the power level. I think, erring on the side of like toning down the alchemy shenanigans, I think is a good way to go about it.
They gotta sell digital cards. Alchemy is full of shenanigans. We'll probably draft this in a number of ways. Burn drafting is one that we've done before and liked.
Yeah.
It is with 2 players. You make 9 packs of 11. You take your 1 pack, pick one, and pass it to your opponent. Then with the pack your opponent has just given you, which now has 10 cards, you take 2 cards from it and burn 2 of them, removing them from the draft. You pass this depleted pack back to your opponent, take the one that they give you. You take 2 and burn the remaining 4.
Yeah.
So you're going to end up with 5 cards per pack. You do that until all of the packs are done, and then you make your deck.
And then you make your deck.
Easy.
Easy peasy.
We will probably also grid draft. Grid drafting is my personal favorite two-player way of going about it. You make 18 packs of 9, or you can just have your stack of cards.
Yeah, and just reveal 9 cards and do that for 18 rounds.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's easier. The player who goes first picks a row or column of 3, and then it goes to the player opposite them. You'll choose out of the remaining 6 cards left whether you want a full 3 cards that your opponent didn't touch, or but these 2 fit your archetype. You take those. The rest are sent away outside of the draft, outside of the game, and you do that again 17 more times. I like the open information. I like the aspect of I'm just taking. I'm not giving anything up. Only take.
I still enjoy the ones where you gotta make some trades, make those hard choices. What are you gonna like give up to take this? I think that adds a interesting, more difficult layer to the draft in a way that I enjoy, but it is not for everybody.
To each their own. And with that, I think we've got all the information we need.
I think so.
Anything you'd like to add?
No, I think we covered everything that, like, how you feel, my thoughts are on it. But yeah, I'm excited to shuffle these up and jam some games.
Me too.
Hell yeah.
Let's do that.
Let's go.
See you later, everybody.
See ya. Good luck, have fun.
You as well.
Let's start off with a Thoughtseize.
What?
Move to combat.
Yep.
Cards in hand?
4.
Oh, that's so many.
No, that's game. These cards are sweet. This cube rules. We're back.
We're back.
We've returned.
We have. And after a handful of drafts, a handful of games, and it was pretty sweet. I had a great time.
I had a good time too. I'm glad you had a good time. We did 2 drafts, burn drafting, before we saw some problems, made some changes.
I wouldn't say problems.
I would say problems. Came back after swapping out around 50 of the cards, I'd say, of this 360 card cube, and then did a little grid draft. I think it played a little better.
I think so too.
It is hard to see at this size of cube with few players, or not with more and more drafts. Just getting a sense of how the whole pool interacts as opposed to just this portion we're seeing and the smaller portion that's being played.
Yeah.
But I still had a good time regardless.
Yeah, it's always fun. I also, even if the first iteration of cubes are rough, I think that's going to happen like anyways, but I enjoy the iterative process of trying something and being part of the like refinement by providing that feedback and then seeing, passing off that feedback to Hayden, him going and making those changes and then bringing it back. It's a really fun experience.
Yeah. What problems? I will call them problems. You don't have to.
Looking back, there were some cards in there that we will touch on that were problematic for the goals of the cube.
One thing that was pretty apparent, 2 drops doing more than one thing was too much.
Yeah.
Having a 2-drop be able to, say, ramp you and then also trigger something else, ramping you and also counting as an artifact in Esper, say, for example, or having them be a good keyword attacker and then having a tap ability on top of that at 2 mana, it was just looking like too much.
Yeah.
Or even being too efficient with what it was doing at 2 mana.
Yeah, I think that showed pretty clearly in the first draft. I drafted the Esper Artifacts deck, and I was able to pick up, I think, a lot of these powerful 2-drops, and some of other 2-drops that I think fit the archetype and are more aligned within the power level. Some standouts for me, I think the big standout were the talismans.
Yes.
Color fixing and ramp at a colorless cost at 2 mana, I think was too much, especially when you have them up against the border posts, is what they're called.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For reference, the border posts are 3 mana artifacts in the allied pairs. So the one I'm looking at right now is Field Mist Border Post for 1, a white and a blue. They come in tapped. They then tap for either of the colors you spent to cast them. They're a little mana rock. Or you may pay 1 generic and return a basic land you control to your hand rather than pay the full 3 mana. And there's the full cycle of those in here for each allied color. And those are much less powerful than 2 generic, come in untapped, tap for whatever color the given talisman will give you.
Looking at those 2 cards, kind of even like in the same pack, it was a bit of a no-brainer of which ones to take. Another card that stand out to me from a pretty powerful set, I don't know if you've heard of it, Modern Horizons 3.
Oh, are those powerful sets?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Like more than normal?
A little bit.
Oh, okay.
And by a little bit, I mean a lot.
Oh.
The one that I picked up that was excellent in the Esper Artifacts deck is Marionette Apprentice. And that just did, I think, exactly to what Hayden was saying before. It just did a wide variety of things. It came in with Fabricate 1, so I could come in with a second body, and then also whenever another creature or artifact dies, it pings the opponent. So it just did so many things on a single card, as opposed to another 2-drop that I had in my deck that worked out really well of Ethereum Sculptor, where that had a singular focus of it made my artifacts cost less. And I think just comparing those 2, I think, approaches to design, which one very much represents modern design, whereas the other is more of the kind of older era, which I think is more in line with like the goals of like the Cube.
Absolutely it is. The decision to change the power level and make it adhere to lower power level, err on the side of not accomplishing as much per card, aligned with what I set out to do here and get closer to that 2009-ish era of Magic. So that was a good decision, losing that power.
Yeah, I think along those lines of thinking, I think this goes back to the first half when we were talking about like, oh, what we're helping to learn and comparing, do I pick new cards or like the older cards? And I think this was an example of like, when I was drafting initially, I would just kind of look at the newer cards and be like, they've really increased the power level of it. I don't think it would hurt just to grab a Modern Horizon 3 card or a card from Ixalan, the more recent Ixalan.
On that same note, removal and interaction being as cheap as it was, often at 1 or 2 mana, was just being too efficient as well. It was accomplishing too much for the mana that was being asked, I felt. So tuning that back, having 3 mana where I would love to be with interaction, and 2 being the exception. In black specifically, this is murder. Murder's in here. 1 black for an instant, destroy target creature. Doomblade is also in here, but Doomblade is the exception, not the rule. I did make a choice to include Burst Lightning, which is shock, and then you can pump it for 4. I felt that was a fine trade-off, and
I think so too.
shock by itself is pretty innocuous.
It's no lightning bolt.
It is no lightning bolt. In black as well, certain effects of pay something mana-wise, sack a creature, and get a reward, just maybe lowering how much you get from that or increasing the mana value is a change that I made, and I think it is for the better. Alara was a slow format, so I've heard. And slowing down the way that this cube plays is just furthering my goals.
Yeah, and I think to that end, there's still a lot of cards in the Esper Artifact deck that I did draft that still fit within that. Like my top end felt pretty good in that I'm doing like a slower game plan. Like my win conditions for that deck were Mindslaver and Shimmer Dragon. And Shimmer Dragon, which is a 4 blue creature dragon, flying 5/6 with, as long as you control 4 or more artifacts, Shimmer Dragon has hexproof, and you can tap 2 untap artifacts you control to draw a card. I think at 6 mana, it's still asking something of you, and at that point, like, you still want to be able to end the game. And that felt like a card that really synergized with the game plan. I still had to work up towards it to get to that point. again, going back to like the talismans, those really helped me get there. But I do feel that once those were kind of like addressed, it would bring those top end cards closer in power level towards the goals.
Absolutely. Shira Dragon, it's been in just about every cube I've had that has artifacts because it's not egregious. It doesn't wholly win the game by itself, but it's a good control reward for that game plan. It's where I want to be with that. I love it.
The thing that I think that makes it not as egregious as other top-end cards, quote-unquote, in the artifact decks, is that it doesn't have affinity. It's a card that, unlike something like Kappa Cannoneer, you can't just power out. Like, you still got to play your lands or have some other form of ramp to be able to cast this 6-drop.
It can't be made cheaper to cast. It can't be made bigger for casting artifacts, and it doesn't have Ward 4.
Exactly.
That's hexproof. Against your Esper artifact deck, I was playing a Jund sack deck. I wanted to make a lot of little guys and then sack them for big guys later on. And I found that I didn't quite have enough token generators or little dudes whose purpose was they were born to die. That is partially on me as a designer. I don't think I put in enough of those effects in red, green, and black. It is also on me as a drafter, as I feel my skill as a drafter is lesser than my skill as a player with a deck. So prioritizing those things, knowing how much there is or how integral they are to the deck, is something that I need to get better at. However, I love the most expensive mana-wise card in that deck, Dragon Lair Spider. 2 red, green, green for, I believe, a 5/5 creature spider. It has reach, and whenever an opponent casts a spell, I make a 1/1 insect. Listeners, I am a sucker for anything that says, whenever blah, 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 casts a spell. That's what you do in the game. How can they not be the best cards? One card that was quite pushed and did not make it into round 2 of this cube, Tarian Soul Cleaver. We've played with it before. It is a 1 mana equipment. It gives the equipped creature vigilance. Whenever another artifact or creature is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, put a 1/1 counter on the equipped creature, and its equip is only 2. So against the Esper Artifacts deck, it was triggering nonstop. It was doing a lot of good stuff. And it was, as we said, just too good for where we wanted things to be, where I wanted things to be.
Oh, one thing that we tried out with the Cube 2 that I think was just like a fun little a way to do the draft is at 360 and 2 players, we were able to do 2 burn drafts in a way that the first draft was one half of the cube, and then the second draft was the complete other half of the cube. So the second draft was completely different cards across the board.
And I think that shows because we both ended up in decks that were not played in that first round we did. In that first draft, I should say.
Yeah, on that one, on the second draft, I ended up in the Naya Dinosaurs deck. And, hoo boy, I lived my dream and was able to get in, I think, 2 Geshath hits and be able to reveal some cards off the top of my library and hit some more dinosaurs, and boy, did that feel good.
It was a lot.
It was a lot.
I was smiling, but it hurt. I ended up in Bant Exalted, and I feel the opposite of how I felt in Junsack as a drafter. The deck did exactly what I wanted it to do. I had low-cost creatures and enchantments that cared about it Exalted. They pumped up what I was getting in with. I think you took that down 2-1. That does not matter. The one game is all that matters. It felt really good. I felt really good. Exalted felt where it needs to be, which was powerful, but not unbeatable.
Yeah. Were there any standout cards in that deck for you?
I don't believe there was any one card that stood out like, oh, this is the monster bomb you need to hit. It was the amount of Exalted cards I had. Rock's Charger is actually one I'd love to call out. 3 and a green for a 3/3 creature Rhino Soldier. Trample Exalted.
Ooh, yeah.
So if it gets in by itself, then it's a 4/4 for 4 with trample. That's great, but obviously on turns 1, 2, and 3, you're getting other little dorks in. It's just a fantastic uncommon. I loved seeing it, loved playing it. Good stuff.
Yeah, that deck really came together for you especially when you're doing the exalted stuff and you're like, oh, here's 3, 4 exalted triggers. It's like, yeah, that happened.
And if you hadn't been in Dinosaurs and taking all of that, I definitely could have benefited from, oh, here's some creatures in white and green that are also big and beefy, have good keywords, attack well, and that would just be amplified by the deck. Alas, you were in Dinosaurs and did rumble in and did stomp me.
I love them so much.
This was the second half of splitting the cube in half and doing 2 burn drafts, and still saw the problems that we identified in the first one. 2 drops that were doing multiple things were just such good value.
Yeah.
Having talismans and cheap ramp outside of green, the interaction being cheap, Fatal Push especially was quite good. And after that, we wanted to make a change. So we made these notes, I went home, did a lot of looking on Scryfall. Shout out to Scryfall, fantastic resource.
Incredible.
Pillar of the community, scryfall.com. Swapped out, again, around 50 cards, toned down the power level. We actually had a really good sit down. I appreciated you taking the time. And we went through the cards one by one and be like, how do we feel about this? How was this? I saw this as a problem. This is in line with where I want. Identifying the border posts as like, this is where you want to be for your fixing in terms of like rocks outside of lands, and pushing that agenda, making those more playable. I sat with that for a bit, made all these changes, and I think the cube is in a better state because of it.
Yeah, I think you really were able to capture the feeling of an Alara-focused cube.
And then this is a little harder to judge because we just got in the 3rd draft and it's still just the 2 of us. I would love to see this with 8 people and see how multiple people competing for a single shard works out.
Yeah.
But this 3rd draft, I ended up in 4-color non-white. You, very early, we did a grid draft.
Yep.
And you
planted a flag.
Planted the flag in white exalted and ended up in Bant with that. And you took it down. You made a real good deck.
Yeah.
Did the good stuff.
I got very lucky in that was able to slam a turn 2 flyer and then suit it up, was able to negate a key kill spell and just kind of off to the races. Also, in the first game, I was able to chuck on an aura that gave it hexproof and just kind of went to town with flyer with a bunch of auras and a few exalted triggers.
Yeah. If you had had any black mana as you were playing Darklit Gargoyle, that is something that was identified in the Reddit posts, the draft primers I talked about, and put me onto this card. Darklit Gargoyle, 1 and a white for an artifact creature gargoyle, which is a 1/2 with flying. And its activated ability is black, and it gets +2/-1 until end of turn. If you have a surplus of black mana and you're doing exalted things, you can just pump this multiple times and it's getting in at 5s, getting in for 7, just absolutely tearing it up. Turns out, didn't need it. Being a 2-mana flyer is also really good.
Yep. I think, that's such a great card that covers such a wide variety of archetypes, being that it is an artifact, it has flying, it has the mana to be able to pump it up. I think it was a very good role player.
No, and that whole time, you can attest to this, I was clapping and laughing, seeing this happen.
Quite thrilled.
I was tickled pink, because it's what I wanted to happen. You had some exalted things, but there were enough cheap enchantments for you to get in and support those early attacks, which I wanted. That's one of the miniature cycles within Bant is 1 mana auras to like throw on creatures and make sure those early attacks can still happen. Love it. Love that happened. I did not pick up nearly enough fixing for being in 4 colors, primarily in black and red, the two non-Bant colors. But I still had some fun times.
Yeah, I think I want to also call out specifically the fixing and lands that you put in the cube. I thought you did a very good job with the selection of lands that made it possible to do 3-color, but not going too crazy into 4 or 5-color soup stuff. I think specifically the tri-lands that don't have cycling 3 or fetchable, I think helps with that. I think the new landscapes from Modern Horizons 3, which is I think a very appropriately power level land, I think that is such a great card because it asks of you to have basics in your deck for this fixing, which I think is a real cost that you need to consider when you're deck building, and putting in 2 basics for that 4th and 5th color is something that a lot of times you don't want to do.
Yeah, especially when you have your check lands or whatever else you add in. You want to be like, no, just give me all of my multi-lands, and it's a real cost. I chose the landscapes over the shard panoramas from Shards of Alara because they are essentially these landscapes, except they don't have cycling and they require paying a generic and tapping and cracking it to find one, and that just feels a little bad.
Yeah.
I understand it's a slow format, but
You still want to be able to cast your spells.
the future's now, old man.
Yeah.
I want to have a little throwback. Oh, not too far. Whoa, 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 whoa,
Slow down
whoa, whoa.
there.
What I'm not a monster.
Little much.
Come on.
We're still living in 2024.
That being said, the 2-for-1s that I did have at 2 and 3 mana, Agony Warp and Branching Bolt, they are excellent. Agony Warp is blue and a black for an instant. It gives target creature -3/-0 and another target creature -0/-3. It's a great 2-for-1 kill something. Hopefully kill 2 things. If you're in combat, you can trade more favorably. Branching Bolt, 1 red and a green for an instant. Choose 1 or both, I believe would be the modern templating. Deal 3 to a creature with flying and deal 3 to a creature without flying. Again, just taking out multiple things, clearing the way.
Yeah.
Hopefully getting death triggers in if you're in Jund or Grixis. Fantastic cards. First question, most important question. Did we like it? Did we have fun? Yes, absolutely
Yeah.
I did.
Yeah, it was fun, I think, playing so much with modern cards and then going back and playing a slower, powered down format. It's a really nice change of pace.
It's a little vacation from modern Magic.
And I like that quite a bit.
What did we learn? I learned that you really got to police your power level. It's easy to be like, I'm familiar with these cards. I want to put these in. Oh, I played this in Bloomborough Limited. I played this in War of the Spark Limited. And it wasn't that bad, so it was probably fine. But going back in time, using those older cards, it's going to change how you perceive these things. It's going to change how they affect the format, and you got to be wary of that power level.
Those are things that you just get better with experience and being able to identify those things. And a lot of it comes down to just putting together 360 curated cards together. It's hard to see it all. Sometimes you get a bit lost in the sauce, and then things that you need to identify only kind of show up once you start playing. And this is exactly what we did.
Yeah.
Played it, identified those things, made some changes. It's better for it. You've learned a lot from it. I've learned a lot from it. It's just fun going through the exercise of the iterative process. At least that's kind of like one of my takeaways from it is I always enjoy that.
Yeah, it's a lesson that I'm learning as we do this. I will say, for anyone who makes a cube and then you play it and you're like, this didn't hit my goals, I felt the same way. I felt dejected. I was like, I should have realized these problems in design. I should have seen this on paper. And Erich has been very reassuring and supportive that no, you will find things in play that you could never see if you spent a million years looking at a design document or just at a list. You will find things interacting. Other people will have different perspectives and point those out, and you'll learn. And that is a natural part of it, and it is not a reason to feel bad. And I'm learning that. And this is just, in case you feel that way, so did I. It gets better. It's a part of it.
Here, here.
And ultimately, it's a part of the fun.
Yeah.
Making changes, looking through the cards you love again.
Well said. I would rather play a not as refined cube tomorrow rather than waiting to play this theoretical perfect cube a year from now. But that's just me.
To each their own, but I think a lot of people would agree with you. Was one archetype more dominant than the other? Not that I noticed. Grixis felt like it was maybe asking a little much of play these creatures and now kill them and now pay more so they come back, as opposed to I got a big dinosaur. So that might need another look. It might need more drafts, more tests. I don't know. But I didn't feel that anything was egregious like I was concerned about.
Yeah, I think also looking at the archetypes and just kind of like my biases and perceptions, I was initially looking at Exalted being like, how could Exalted ever like get there? And honestly, like it in the both times that I played against it and played with it, it felt nice to like come together. Because for me, I think doing the like all-in single creature type thing traditionally, or at least in like modern Magic, doesn't always quite get there. So I think it is nice to kind of have those perceptions changed in a good way.
I didn't know that you felt that way. That's interesting. I'm glad that you were proven wrong. Was there enough bleeding between the shards that the allied pairs can go together? I felt so. I was looking at dinosaurs when I was in Jund. You taking the artifact like Flyer, Darklit Gargoyle when you were in Bant. There was enough cross-pollination, and I'm happy with how that turned out. And it can do a little more, even. That wouldn't be bad, but it's good where it is.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think, yeah, having those adjusted 2-drops as those role players that aren't just pure power, but they're still synergistic, I think there was enough overlap in those cards for things to feel good.
Would we change anything if we were to do it all again? For me, in design, I would pay closer attention. I don't feel it was a problem, but I would be more mindful of power and toughness. Because in original Ixalan, Colossal Dreadmaw felt enormous as a 6/6 trampler, and it was to be treated that way. So being more mindful of wanting dinosaurs to feel huge, of wanting Exalted to really feel like a power-up, really being mindful of that power and toughness balance, of what creatures get it, where you can scale back a little bit for power to show these other things as being as impactful as they are on the board. Yeah, it's not something I've seen as like, this is a problem to fix, but something, if I were to do it again, I'd go in with that mindset as well.
That's interesting. That's really cool.
Great. Well, I'm happy to keep playing this, to keep refining it. I think this is a cube I want to keep together. I have, again, a lot of the cards from Alara anyways. I like the way this played. Seeing how 8 people tackle it, or 6, or just a lot more, will be quite interesting, and that'll, I feel, give me some good avenues to pursue in terms of refinement and card choices. Again, other people will see things that you don't, or pointing out like, hey, have you considered this card? And there's so many Magic cards. There's so many game pieces that little gems, a diamond in the rough, can exist anywhere. And I want to find them.
Yeah. I'm really glad to hear that you are going to be keeping this together as a cube that you'll continue to use and like iterate on and like play. I think it, again, having that very focused goal towards Alara and Shards, and it is with that a lower power environment, I think is really neat that we'll just have that within our kind of like cube rotation available whenever you want to like bust it out. I think that's great because I really enjoyed playing it. Any other like final thoughts from the cube designer himself?
My only thought that I would leave folks with is if you love a certain set and a way it plays, make it. Make a set either inspired by it or explicitly a limited cube I know Innistrad is quite popular in that regard. People make Innistrad cubes. If you want to go all the way back to, I don't know, Scourge block. Like, Scourge was one that you really loved. It's where Forgotten Ancient's from. I love it for that reason alone. You can do that. You can focus on that. Play the things you love, folks.
Hell yeah. I love the sound of that.
Yeah.
That's great.
And with that, we move on to Peek at the Week! Eric.
Hayden.
I've been talking a lot. What is your Peek at the Week?
Peak of the week for me today is a band that I've been listening to for quite a few years now. They are called Future Islands, and they are a American synth pop band that their lead singer is a very expressive person. In the vocals, in the lyrics, he has a very kind of deep, guttural kind of voice. I also kind of get Cher notes from him, but he's backed by like synth melodies, and I find it such like an interesting combination of the two. He is also very known for his wild kind of like unique dance moves. I think they're kind of like notoriety came from, they were on Letterman years ago, and his dance moves kind of like really were the defining thing about that show. But it's something I've just been listening to them for like a really long time. I love everything that they've like been doing. I've actually was introduced to them by a VR experience.
Oh.
This was back in, I think, 2016, when it was still pretty early days of VR.
Yeah.
In its kind of commercial infancy. And it was noted as like, oh, this VR music video featuring very colorful, wacky, cartoony dancing characters led by a like marching band kind of like leader guy with this very like kind of like poppy synthy like upbeat music, was noted as like, oh, one of the best VR experiences like at the time. And I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. And I'm like, oh, this band's actually like pretty awesome, and just been following them ever since. I was fortunate enough to see them live
Hell
this year,
yeah.
and it was an incredible show. Got there like really early, right to the front, and yeah, just seeing the lead singer perform in person was just an incredible experience, because he's, like I said, a very dramatic, emotional, expressive person. And the cool thing about him live singing that doesn't really get picked up in the recordings is with his kind of like deep guttural voice, he does some almost kind of metal like vocals.
Oh.
Which is it's such an interesting like juxtaposed to the like pop sounds and like melodies, and yeah, it's just a wonderful time. So that's my Peak of the Week is the band Future Islands. Check them out if you're kind of interested in that synth pop music. Yeah.
Is he the guy who, if you played his music before, he's like,
Probably.
Is that him?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I was like, this guy's voice, huh? It stands out even in ambient, like, who is this guy?
Who is this guy? Yeah.
Very sick. That's so rad you were able to see them live.
I know.
Where was it? What venue?
It was at the Malkin Bowl, which is in Stanley Park.
Ooh.
It was an outdoor show. Fortunately, the weather worked out for us. It's very interesting. That venue, you're very specifically not allowed to bring umbrellas. So if it is raining, bring a raincoat.
Then it's Prince at the Super Bowl, where the show's in the rain, folks.
Yeah. No, it is a really, really fun venue. Great time. Yeah.
Hell yeah.
Hell yeah.
That's sick. My Peak of the Week
Oh, yeah.
is my local library.
Yes.
Let's
go.
I love libraries. They're not just for books, not just for DVDs. Where we are, there's color printing. You'll get some libraries, they'll give you credit if you are a library member for every month. You can do color printing. Why would I be interested in that as a Magic the Gathering player? I don't know.
Who'd have thought?
Who's to say? There is interlibrary loans. If you want something and it's not in your city's library, or it's not like within the surrounding area, you can, maybe your state or your province has a program where you can search, is this anywhere in the whole province? And for me, I was able to find one way up north, and they're sending it down to me. It'll take a month, but it'll get here. That's super sick. All free. Libraries are also community spaces. You want to have a meeting room and book that? Your library probably has one. You want to do some 3D printing? If it's a big library, it might have it.
Absolutely.
You want to have like some community programs like some that ours do in the surrounding like municipalities. Board games for ESL. I think that's such a great idea.
That's awesome.
I don't know what games they play. Maybe Apples to Apples or Settlers of Catan, like something basic, and helping people in your community learn English. I think that's a great avenue through gaming to do that.
Absolutely.
Your libraries are so fantastic. A lot of them nowadays are also eliminating late fees because it's counter to the mission of the library. What does the library want? People to come, people to use their resources, people to take out books, and library fees are a block to that. Not just as a, I have this, and now I gotta pay to return it, this sucks, and creating a bad feeling, but as a block to even going in the first place. I don't know that I'll be able to return this on time, so I'm just not gonna use it. A lot of libraries, it's now more of a social contract, where, hey, you got this, you got it for a month, give it back by this date. If you don't, we understand, give it back when you can, but there's no late fee to have a sort of stigma around it. I think that's a great positive change.
Absolutely.
Libraries may also have access to your city archives. You want microfilm? You want maps? Do you play RPGs? You want, maybe city maps, Call of Cthulhu? You want to look at newspapers from the time? Your library is more than happy. They're eager to help you. Big shout out. That's my peak at the week. I've been utilizing my local library, just my one branch. There's so many other branches of the city's library. And there's so many cities that have libraries where I'm at. I love them!
No reason to not check out your local library.
At the very least, if you're looking to read a book or watch a movie, just check if your local library has it. Save you a couple bucks.
Yeah. Public services.
Public
Incredible.
services. I love them. And with that, let's bring this episode to a close.
Thank you for listening. Just to cover, our cover art is by Brittany Thompson. All the music credits can be found in the show notes. I've been Eric, joined by Hayden and the creator of the wonderful Shard Cube.
Oh, he called it wonderful. That makes me feel wonderful. Your cube is up next.
My cube is up next.
What are you gonna be bringing us?
Ooh. So keeping it a little bit vague, but I think just to kind of start filling in the gaps of different cubes, I want to try and do a multiplayer focus cube. But not like a 4-player. I'm towing the line between trying to have something different. So you'll just have to check out next episode and see what that will end up being.
That's so intriguing. I'm intrigued. I'm in.
See you next time. Wow.
I'll be on the play.
Thoughtsies? How many cards you got? Oh, so many.
Oh no! That's game. Oh
This
yeah.
game? Oh, it's cute. These cards are sweet.
Oh, this cube is pretty good.
We've listened to that a lot.